January 31, 1945. At Clark Air Base on Luzon, in the Philippines, Major Frank T. McCoy's hands shook faintly as he took photographs of the plane in front of him. A complete Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber with the tail number 763-12. This couldn't be their normal configuration. No nation's air force would construct bombers in this manner. In the tropical sunlight, the fuselage shone, its unique cylindrical form explaining its Allied moniker. The bomber, stretching almost 20 meters from nose to rear, rested on its tricycle landing gear much like a gigantic cigar placed on the airstrip's surface. Its wings, extending 25 meters from one tip to the other, exhibited no indications of combat damage. The engines, 14-cylinder radial types producing 1,500 horsepower apiece, seemed undamaged. This was not an aircraft recovered from a crash site. This was a fully operational bomber left behind by its crew as the Americans advanced. Yet what truly seized McCoy's full focus, what would transform American perspectives on Japanese aircraft strategy, was the feature he unearthed after crawling inside the wings through the maintenance panels. The fuel tanks had no protection whatsoever. There was no self-sealing rubber lining, no armored plating, no built-in fire extinguishing system. No form of protective covering at all, only thin, perhaps 2 mm thick, aluminum separating thousands of liters of volatile aviation fuel from incoming enemy bullets. Major McCoy, as head of the Technical Air Intelligence Unit in the Southwest Pacific, had inspected many wrecked Japanese planes throughout the Pacific theater. But not one experience had prepared him for this discovery. This aircraft, left whole as the Americans liberated Clark Field, would reveal a mindset in engineering so foreign to Allied doctrine that it would take analysts months to thoroughly grasp the consequences. The calculations prompted by this finding would redefine American air tactics and aircraft construction for the rest of the conflict. All of the beliefs American aircrew held about Japanese strengths, about how far imperial designers would go for speed and range, about what value Japanese forces placed on crew safety, were about to be dismantled piece by the data found in this single, undamaged sample of Japan's chief bomber. The path leading to this moment started 4 years prior, on December 8, 1941. On that day, with smoke still drifting up from Pearl Harbor, 82 G4M bombers and 26 G3M bombers took off from airfields located on Formosa. Clark Field, the principal U.S. air center in the Philippines, was their chosen objective. The assault caught the defenders in total tactical surprise. When the Japanese reached the target at 12:35 p.m., they flew at 20,000 feet, out of range of American anti-aircraft guns. 27 bombers from the 1st Attack Group released 636 bombs over the runways and installations at Clark Field. Seconds later, 0 fighters swooped down at extremely low altitude, their guns shredding any aircraft not already wrecked by the bombing. Out of the 17 B-17 flying fortresses present on the base, 12 were instantly wiped out. Virtually every P-40 Warhawk was obliterated by fire. In under 45 minutes, American military aviation in the Philippines was essentially destroyed. Lieutenant James Harrington, one of the rare American pilots to survive, observed from a bomb shelter as the Japanese planes disappeared north. What struck me was how they came in, Harrington wrote in his after-action account. Impeccable formation, flying high, totally unreachable for us. Then the fighters dropped down and ripped through us. We couldn't get even a single aircraft off the ground, yet the Betty bombers left unharmed. The handful of American fighters that took off got there too late, only to find the enemy gone. The Japanese had proven the remarkable range of their bombers, attacking from positions 460 miles away, a range unmatched by any American bomber at that time. The Betty's impact during its initial year in battle would be dramatically successful. On December 10, 1941, a mere 2 days following the attack on Clark Field, 26 G4M bombers, accompanied by older G3M Nell bombers, launched an assault on Force Z, the British naval group built around HMS Prince of Wales and HMS Repulse. The assault commenced at roughly 12:20 in the afternoon. Japanese bombers arrived in synchronized formations, conducting torpedo attacks with a precision that astonished the British witnesses. The Betty bombers were armed with Type 91 airborne torpedoes, each tipping the scales at 840 kilograms and containing a 205 kilogram explosive charge. These torpedoes had been engineered specifically for operations in shallow water, running at depths capable of hitting ships even near shorelines. The torpedo assaults concentrated on the two major warships, striking with remarkable precision. Prince of Wales, a battleship weighing 43,000 tons and exemplifying the latest British naval innovation, sustained at least 6 torpedo impacts in addition to damage from high-altitude bombers. Subsurface explosions tore huge breaches in the vessel's hull, causing flooding that overwhelmed the efforts of the damage control teams. The battleship started to heel dangerously. Repulse, a battle cruiser originally laid down during World War I and updated during the 1930s, endured a minimum of 4 torpedo impacts as it maneuvered in an attempt to avoid the incoming planes. The vessel's anti-aircraft guns succeeded in downing several Japanese planes, but failed to stop the well-coordinated torpedo offensives from striking home. The total destruction was ultimately catastrophic. Both of the principal warships overturned and sank within hours following the onslaught. Prince of Wales submerged at about 13:20 hours. Repulse sank afterward at about 13:33 hours. 841 British crew members lost their lives. The remaining crew were retrieved by the accompanying destroyers. From initial contact to final submersion, the engagement lasted under 2 hours. It marked the first occasion in the history of naval combat where major warships, actively defending themselves, were destroyed solely by airborne attacks while at sea. The G4M Betty bombers accomplished what naval experts had long debated as possible. British dominance at sea in Asian waters was destroyed in a mere 90 minutes. Throughout the Pacific theater up to early 1942, American and Allied aviators faced Betty bombers in nearly every significant battle. The planes appeared to operate without restraint, striking objectives at distances that surpassed traditional expectations. They assaulted Darwin, Australia from airfields situated 1,500 meters away, thereby showing a reach unmatched by any Allied bomber. Strikes on Port Moresby originated from air bases beyond the New Guinea Mountains, keeping Allied positions continually under pressure in the southwest Pacific. Attacks on Guadalcanal were launched from Rabaul, over distances greater than 600 meters, demonstrating Japanese air power across enormous maritime regions. The range at which the Betty operated provided Japanese forces with a strategic adaptability that Allied leaders found difficult to oppose. U.S. fighter planes deployed at outlying bases could not reach Betty bombers taking off from distant runways. Allied air installations suffered raids from Japanese bases out of their own reach. The disparity in bomber range allowed Japanese units to launch attacks freely, while Allied forces struggled to respond efficiently. This advantage lasted through the opening 6 months of the conflict. Betty bombers played a role in almost every Japanese campaign throughout the Pacific and Southeast Asia. Their missions targeted objectives in the Philippines, Malaya, Netherlands East Indies, New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands. They provided assistance to naval missions across the entire theater. They carried out reconnaissance operations reaching distances beyond that of any Allied planes. The Betty emerged as the emblem of the range and potency of Japanese air power. However, this advantage was completely reliant on the scarce opposition from Allied fighters. When Betty groups could launch attacks without being intercepted, when they were able to close in on targets from high altitudes outside anti-aircraft fire, and when they could release their payloads and withdraw before fighters responded, the aircraft proved remarkably effective. Such circumstances were typical of operations in the initial months of 1942 as Allied air resources remained scarce and scattered. Yet by the middle of 1942, the tactical situation started to shift. With the augmentation of American fighter forces, as Wildcats got replaced by the improved Hellcats and Corsairs, as pilot training became more rigorous and tactical methods progressed, Betty crews started to encounter troubling casualty numbers. This transformation was unmistakable by August 8, 1942. On that day, 23 G4M bombers from the 4th Air Group left Repulse to strike American forces at Guadalcanal. American fighters encountered the group over Savo Island. During the ensuing engagement, 18 out of the 23 Betty bombers were destroyed. Roughly 120 aircrew perished in what became the largest single G4M loss of the entire campaign. Fighter pilots consistently made the same remarks in all battles. The Betty would burst into flames after being struck even lightly. Just 2 or 3 bullets anywhere in the wings or fuselage led to disastrous consequences. The aircraft picked up grim informal names that quickly circulated among American air units. Flying Cigar, One-Shot Lighter, Flying Zippo, all references to the Betty's notorious tendency to erupt in fire after sustaining combat damage. When October 1942 came, and Lieutenant Commander John Thomas Blackburn arrived at Guadalcanal to take command of BF-17 flying F-4U Corsairs, the Betty's infamy was drastically different. The first occasion we intercepted a Betty group, we were stunned at how easily they went down. Blackburn later recounted, striking them on the wings or fuselage, and they'd blow up. We deliberately sought them out, recognizing them as some of the most exposed targets in the Pacific Air War. Still, a full grasp of just how compromised the Betty was, and the design decisions that led to such incredible losses, wouldn't be realized until the Americans began retrieving intact units for intensive inspection. The first major intelligence success occurred in November 1942 when Australian troops overran Japanese airfields at Buna in Papua New Guinea. Among the planes left behind, technical air intelligence teams found Betty bombers with differing degrees of damage. Preliminary assessments supported what pilots had previously testified. The fuel tanks lacked any protection. Aeronautical engineers from the Allied Technical Air Intelligence Unit, Southwest Pacific, performed the first comprehensive review. Examining the wing panels showed fuel tanks with no defensive features, thin aluminum skins, no rubber sealant coatings, no protective linings, and an absence of fire suppression gear. Several Betty bombers inspected at Buna showed these same properties. This was not due to damage incurred in battle or makeshift changes in the field. It was the standard Japanese approach to construction. The ramifications were enormous. By 1942, all American bombers were fitted with self-sealing fuel tanks. The B-17 Flying Fortress included them, starting with the B-17C version. The B-24 Liberator had adopted them since the XB-24B prototype. Even single-seat fighters such as the P-38 and P-47 were equipped with protected fuel systems. Self-sealing fuel tanks consisted of multiple rubber layers that expanded when exposed to fuel, closing up bullet or shrapnel holes to stop leaks and fires. The adoption of this feature increased the aircraft's weight dramatically but greatly improved chances of survival for aircrews. For American military planners, that weight penalty was vital and completely non-negotiable. In contrast, here was Japan's leading land-based bomber, manufactured in the thousands and flown all over the Pacific, with fuel tanks offering no safeguards. The reduction in weight from foregoing self-sealing tanks, armored plating, and fire control systems was instantly noticeable. But the sacrifice in aircrew safety grew painfully evident as casualty numbers rose with each sortie. The Betty captured at Clark Field in January 1945 allowed for the most thorough technical examination. Major McCoy and his personnel dedicated 3 weeks to disassembling and recording details of every component. Their findings, classified as secret and shared among all Allied air forces, presented drawings and descriptions that illuminated both the Betty's remarkable performance and its critical flaws. The G4M Model 1 data reflected an airframe designed with uncompromising focus on speed and operational radius. Its bare weight was 6,741 kilograms, notably lightweight for a bomber in this category. The fully loaded weight reached 9,500 kilograms. Fuel was stored in a total of 4,780 L, spread throughout 8 unarmored tanks, 4 in each wing, placed in the center wing section where they faced the greatest risk from enemy fire. The plane's peak velocity was 428 km per hour or close to 265 miles per hour. The maximum reach was 634 km over 3,700 miles. Its ceiling operational limit was 8,500 meters. The aircrew consisted of 7: a pilot, a co-pilot, a navigator, a bombardier, a radio operator, and 2 gunners. The construction of the fuel system was especially enlightening. All 8 tanks were configured in 4 pairs, running along the wing's longitudinal axis at the junction with the fuselage. This allowed utilization of the thickest wing area for greater fuel storage but also put the tanks straight into the trajectory of hostile attacks. Strikes from below or from the sides would, by default, hit the fuel tanks. The structure was made of aluminum, offering no shielding. Because there was no self-sealing lining, even minor holes caused ongoing fuel leaks. American technicians estimated that omitting defensive features reduced each aircraft's weight by more than 500 kilograms. This mass reduction was directly turned into extra fuel space and increased operational radius. However, the resulting vulnerability was just as easily measured. Accounts from combat demonstrated that Betty bombers hit in their wing sections almost always detonated. The lack of armored protection created what the engineers called a single, critical point of failure, a component whose destruction assured total aircraft loss. The statistics revealed the reasoning behind the design outlined in September 1937, when the Japanese Navy set forth the requirements that shaped the entire G4M project. A top speed of 398 km per hour. A typical operating altitude of 3,000 meters. An unladen range of 4,722 km or 3,700 km when loaded with an 800 kg bomb or torpedo payload. These demands reflected the naval strategies developed by Japan in the late 1930s. The Japanese Empire spread across immense stretches of Pacific territory. Its navy bases were often separated by thousands of kilometers of sea. Their requirements called for bombers that could reach enemy targets far beyond the flight envelopes of carrier-based aircraft, operating from land installations to assist naval campaigns throughout the region. None of Japan's current bombers could meet such demands. The G4M bomber, then in Japanese inventory, managed only about 3,000 kilometers at its utmost range. Early versions of American bombers like the B-7 were limited to even less. No operational bomber in any nation's inventory in 1937 could carry out attacks at the ranges being demanded by Japanese military leadership. The Navy's specifications were not chosen at random. They were derived from calculated distances that the armed forces would need to traverse in any likely Pacific campaign. From Formosa to the Philippines spanned 460 miles. From Repulse to Guadalcanal, 600 miles. From bases in the Japanese home islands out to distant target areas across the Pacific, the distances reached into the thousands of miles. Producing a bomber that satisfied these demands would grant Japan strategic options unmatched by rival nations. But these criteria also rested on expectations of future battle that would prove disastrously inaccurate. Planners in Japan believed that audacity and tactical surprise would shield their long-range bombers. They further calculated that enemy fighters would be constrained by both range and available numbers. They thought Japan would finish the conflict quickly, before its opponents could ramp up production to the overwhelming levels. These beliefs would all be proven incorrect. The individual charged with this formidable challenge was Kiro Honjo, who took over from Joji Hattori as head of the Mitsubishi Design Division. In the early 1930s, Honjo had gained direct experience in bomber design at Junkers facilities in Germany, absorbing European engineering theories and building techniques before his return to Japan. He recognized from the beginning that fulfilling the Navy's wishes would require design sacrifices unacceptable to Western air services. Gathering a staff of engineers at Mitsubishi's Nagoya works, Honjo began studying the monumental problems posed by these requirements. The group performed an exhaustive analysis, establishing weight limits for each subsystem and build element. They benchmarked bombers from other countries to find opportunities to lighten structural elements without compromising core strength. They investigated innovative methods and materials for further reductions in weight. The engineering challenge was starkly straightforward. To deliver the specified range, tremendous reserves of fuel were required. Every liter of aviation gasoline weighed about 0.8 kilograms. Storing 4,780 liters meant carrying close to 3,800 kilograms of fuel on a full load. To hit the target speed figures with this fuel quantity, the design had to be pared down to the lightest possible structure. Each kilogram added to the base weight meant less fuel or payload could be carried. These two imperatives were in fundamental conflict. Fuel was inherently heavy, as were protective measures. Hundreds of kilograms of armor were needed to shield personnel stations and key systems. Fitting self-sealing tanks added significant mass, demanding rubber compounds and extra reinforcing structures. Fire control equipment increased weight. Additional safety redundancies did likewise. Altogether, the necessary defensive gear would render the required performance targets impossible. Honjo made the definitive choice for all G4Ms subsequently built. Safety measures would be set aside to maximize range and speed.